Today we're going to make a traditional red velvet cake. We're going to start with 2 cups of vegetable oil in our mixer with 2 1/4 cups of white sugar. We're going to turn that on medium until it's all combined together. We're going to add 3 eggs. And mix again. Then we're going to add our 3 ounces of red food coloring and 2 teaspoons of vanilla. And while that's mixing, we're going to mix our dry ingredients together.
Now we're going to mix our dry ingredients. The recipe calls for 3 1/2 cups of cake flour. I learned a long time ago that cake flour is really expensive, so instead of buying it, I just take a tablespoon of cornstarch for every cup of flour. So this is going to be 3 1/2 tablespoons of cornstarch, and add regular all-purpose flour and mix together until you get all that cornstarch mixed in and it becomes kind of one solid consistency. To that, we're going to add a 1.5 teaspoons of salt and a 1/4 cup of unsweetened cocoa powder. This is going to give it that chocolatey flavor for our red velvet cake, but not too overpowering. And then we have to add this to our wet ingredients, which are still in the mixer.
Now that our wet ingredients are thoroughly combined, we're going to add half of the dry ingredients. That flour, cocoa powder, and salt mixture. It's about half. And mix that together. And then we have a 1.25 cups of buttermilk that we're going to alternate adding, with the last thing that you add being flour. So we're going to put half of the milk in, and then 1/4 of the flour mixture, half of the buttermilk, and then another 1/4 of the flour mixture. Buttermilk. And this same way we do with most cakes is we're going to start off slow and then increase the speed. You just start off slow to get things combined so there's not a blow up of ingredients out the side of your mixer. Last of the buttermilk. And then we're going to add the last of the flour. Now, while that is finishing mixing, we're going to grease the pans.
So we're going to grease the pans. A traditional red velvet cake has 3 layers. And I make my own pan grease. It is a mixture of flour, shortening, and vegetable oil. So I like to grease the sides and bottom of each pan with just a regular old pastry brush. So when you're mixing your cake together, what you want is kind of a bright red color to it, so you make sure that the food coloring has been distributed through the whole thing. And then it's going to be a little thick. And the last thing that we add to our cake is the leavening agent, something that gives it that light and fluffy texture that red velvet is known for. It's not a dense cake. So red velvet at the very end, most people add, as they're going, baking soda, and then at the very end add vinegar. I'm kind of a science buff, so I like to add my vinegar and my baking soda together and watch it bubble up before I add it to the mixture. And that's what we're going to do now. All right, now we're going to watch the chemical reaction of baking soda added to vinegar. See how it bubbles up like that? That's what it does inside the cake too. I like to stir it around and make sure that you get all of that baking soda disintegrated into the vinegar. And then we pour it in and lightly stir. We only need to stir slightly. It doesn't need to be mixed with the mixer. You can do this one by hand because it's a small addition at the very end. About 10 seconds of stirring it in and making sure it gets all the way there. And then we are going to distribute evenly among these 3 pans. Keep your spatula handy because you're going to have to, this is a thick batter, so we have to scrape the sides of the bowl to get it all out. And then we're going to put these in a 350-degree oven for the next 30 minutes, and then they should be done.
The cakes have been cooling for about an hour. Now we're going to pull them out of the pan. Let them cool on wire racks. You see how easy that comes out? That's what happens when you use that pan grease. Not even a piece stuck to the pan. And then we're going to ice it later. So now we're going to make cream cheese frosting. I have a 12 ounces of cream cheese and 12 ounces of softened butter that first we're going to mix together until they become one. Now that they're thoroughly combined, if you want to look in and see, we're going to start adding our powdered sugar. This is 4 cups total that we're going to add. I'm going to start with just a little bit at a time and let it get incorporated. keep adding slowly until all of the powdered sugar has been added to the bowl. Then we're going to add 6 tablespoons of heavy cream. This is going to make it a nice and creamy cream cheese frosting. And then we leave that for about 10 minutes. I'm going to mix them together so that it gets to be light and fluffy. So our cream cheese frosting is made. Our cakes are ready. The first thing I'm going to do is take a little dab of the cream cheese frosting and put it on my cake board. That's going to make the cake stick to it so that it doesn't move around the board as we go along. We're going to pick up the cake right on the board. I'm going to use my spatula. Put some of that cream cheese frosting right on top. Spread it around with the offset spatula. Need a little bit more. So because we are icing the cake with the same thing that we are filling it with, we don't have to build the wall around like I normally would on a layered cake like this. We take our next layer, put it right on top. More icing. Then, so once I fill the cake and I have 3 layers, I'm going to go stick it in the refrigerator so that that icing can harden before I try to ice the outside of the cake. Otherwise, it's just going to slide all along. We need the icing to firm up a little. So here's our 3rd layer. Put it on top, and then we're going to let it cool down for about 30 minutes. Let that icing set up so that then we can frost the outside. Now that the icing has had time to set up in the filling, we're going to ice the outside of the cake. I just pour some icing over the top, and then with my offset spatula, put this over here. You can see we just kind of let it go down the sides, and then and just kind of smooth it out. A little more icing there. You get a smooth and even coverage over the cake. Now with this one, we're going to pipe some rosettes on over it after we have done the base layer. Otherwise, we would call this the crumb layer and keep going. So we just want to get it covered so that you can't see much of the cake peeking through. And then we're going to let it chill in the refrigerator again. And sometimes you might need to just add just a little bit more icing to get through the spots where the cake is
coming straight through. Like that. And then we're going to put it back in the refrigerator for another about 30 minutes and then come back and finish. Now that the cakes are cooled enough, we can ice them however we want to. Any decoration you want to put on, any piping you want to do, and any color.